My boyfriend is ignoring me because I'm getting fat. He even insulted me in front of his friend, but he didn't know I'm the daughter of his CEO. I took revenge. Now he wants to come back in my life. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories. Thank you. My name is Alina. I'm 22 years old, and for a long time, I thought love meant staying even when it hurt. I thought love was supposed to be patient, forgiving, and kind. But turns out, love doesn't mean much when the person you give it to treats you like you're not enough. I wasn't always like this, confident, calm, and collected. I used to be soft. The kind of girl who'd stay up late just to text goodnight first. The kind who'd cancel plans just to make time for someone else. The kind who thought if you loved someone hard enough, they'd never leave. That girl still lives somewhere inside me, but she's changed. Because life, and one particular boy, taught me how cruel love can feel when it's not real. It all started with Ryan. He wasn't some Instagram model or flashy dude driving a sports car. He was just charming. That kind of charm that slips under your skin slowly. Like at first, you don't even notice it, and by the time you do, it's already wrapped around you like a vine. We met at this little food court near my campus. I was standing in line at a burger place, second-guessing my decision to eat something greasy again, and he stood behind me, cracking jokes about how people always pretend they're on a diet until they see curly fries. I laughed, even though I was annoyed. He had that kind of voice that made even bad jokes sound funny. We bumped into each other a few more times after that, once at the library, once during a group study session, and eventually on social media. It felt like fate, or maybe just really good algorithms. Our first few months of dating were sweet. Movie nights, long phone calls, cheap dates that felt expensive because we were happy. He told me I was beautiful every single day. Said he loved how I didn't care about makeup or dressing up too much. That I was natural. And I believed him. I believed every word. Because when someone makes you feel like the center of their world, you don't stop to check if they're building that world on solid ground or lies. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just some regular girl in college. My dad is the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the city. But I never mentioned it. Not because I was ashamed or anything, but because I wanted someone to like me. Not the money, not the name, just Alina. I kept that part of my life quiet. I didn't flaunt expensive clothes or post fancy things online. I liked living low-key. It gave me peace. And Ryan? He seemed to like that too. He once said I was refreshing because I didn't act like the other girls who wanted designer bags or attention. But that's the thing about people like Ryan. They only praise you when you fit into the version they've built of you. The moment you change, grow, or step outside that mold, they flip, and that's exactly what happened. It started small. A few months into our relationship, I gained a little weight. Nothing major, just a few pounds. I was stressed with finals, my sleep schedule was trash, and let's be real, comfort food became my therapy. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was still me, still cracking jokes, still caring, still showing up for him. But something in Ryan shifted. Slowly, quietly, but I felt it. He stopped holding my hand as tightly. His compliments became less frequent. The way he looked at me changed from soft admiration to quiet disappointment. And even though he didn't say anything directly, his silence screamed. One day, while we were hanging out in his room, he said something that stayed with me. Something like, "You should be careful, babe. You're kinda letting go." And he laughed after like it was just a silly observation. But it wasn't silly to me. It stung. I laughed too, but inside I wanted to cry. That one sentence felt like a spotlight on every insecurity I had. My body, my worth, my fear of not being enough. I started questioning everything. Every outfit I wore, every bite I took, every mirror I passed. I tried to brush it off, tried to be chill, because girls are always told not to be too emotional, but I was drowning in silent sadness. And the worst part? I still loved him. Still thought maybe if I just lost a little weight, things would go back to normal. Maybe he'd look at me the way he used to. Maybe he'd hold me again and tell me I'm beautiful, just once more. But the more I tried, the colder he became. He stopped texting me as much. Took hours to reply, canceled plans, ignored calls. And when I asked him about it, he'd say I was too sensitive. It was like being gaslit in slow motion. Until one day, he said something in front of his friend that I'll never forget. After weeks of Ryan drifting away, I started to feel like a ghost in my own relationship. I was still there, still loving him, still trying. But he wasn't really looking at me anymore. It's like he was just waiting for an excuse to push me away. And one night, he found that excuse. Or maybe he created it. It was a Friday evening. I remember because I spent almost 2 hours getting ready. I curled my hair, did my makeup a little differently, even wore this deep green dress I hadn't worn in forever. It hugged my curves, the ones I was learning to love again, and I felt, what? Okay, not perfect, but okay. Ryan had invited me to hang out with some of his friends. We were meeting them at this rooftop lounge downtown, the kind of place with overpriced drinks and fake grass walls for Instagram photos. I was nervous, not gonna lie. I hadn't met most of his friends before. And given how he'd been acting lately, I just wanted the night to go smoothly. When we got there, everything felt off from the beginning. He didn't introduce me properly, just waved and said something like, "Hey, this is Alina." No, my girlfriend, no smile, no hand on my back like he used to do. His friends were loud, especially one guy named Chris. He had that fake laugh energy and made jokes like he thought he was the funniest person alive. I tried to laugh along, tried to be polite, but I felt so out of place. Then the conversation shifted to people they knew in college, who had glowed up and who had let themselves go. And then, Chris cracked a joke about a girl, who apparently got too comfortable in her relationship and blew up like a balloon. Everyone laughed. And Ryan turned to me and said, right in front of them all, that I should be careful or I might end up like that too. Just like that, with a grin on his face like it was the funniest thing ever. Like I was in on the joke. But I wasn't laughing. I froze. My heart dropped. My face felt hot and my hands started shaking. I looked around the table and saw his friends awkwardly glancing away, pretending not to notice how crushed I looked. But no one said anything, not even Ryan. He just took a sip of his drink and looked at his phone like nothing happened. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Just the comment, it was everything. The build-up, the silence. The slow erosion of how he saw me. I had tolerated every side comment, every ignored message, every little emotional cut. But this was the final blow. I stood up, didn't say a word. I grabbed my purse and walked straight out of that place. I didn't even wait for an elevator. I stormed down 4 flights of stairs with tears threatening to spill out. The worst part? He didn't follow me. Not that night, not the next morning. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe he'd realize what he did and apologize. Maybe he'd show up at my door with flowers like in the movies. But nothing, just silence. And that silence? It was louder than any insult. That was the moment I realized I didn't just lose Ryan's love, I lost my dignity trying to keep it. I cried the entire night, not just because he hurt me, but because I let it happen. I gave so much of myself to someone who made me feel like I was hard to love the second I stopped looking a certain way. But even in that sadness, something else started to rise inside me. Not anger, not revenge, not yet, but clarity, the kind that only comes after you've been broken. I remembered who I was before I met Ryan. Strong, kind, confident, bold. I remembered the promises I made to myself growing up to never let someone make me feel less than enough. And I realized I had to find that version of me again. The version he tried to shrink. And you know what the crazy part was? He had no idea who I really was. He thought I was just some average college girl. He didn't know that the very company he worked for, the job he always complained about, was owned by my father. Yeah, that's when the story started to flip. But I didn't seek revenge right away. First, I had to fix something much more important. Me. The day after that rooftop humiliation, I didn't leave my room. I turned off my phone, closed the curtains, and just let myself fall apart. I cried until my head ached. I kept replaying that moment over and over. The way Ryan laughed, the way his friends looked at me like I was a joke, the way he didn't even try to check on me. I felt disgusted, not with my body, but with how I had let someone make me question my worth. I had given him so much power over how I saw myself. Every insult he threw, every backhanded compliment, every time he pulled away a little more, I absorbed it all. I let his silence become my mirror. And that realization hurt more than anything. But after hours of crying and being curled up in bed, something inside me shifted. I looked at myself in the mirror. Hair messy, eyes swollen, skin dull, and I didn't recognize who I was. Not because of how I looked, but because of how small I had made myself for someone who didn't even have the decency to respect me. That night, I made a quiet decision. No more begging for love. No more waiting for someone to see my value. No more losing myself just to keep someone else happy. I was going to choose me, fully, unapologetically, and fiercely. But first, I needed to heal. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. What I needed was to rebuild the parts of me I'd abandoned. So the next morning, I got out of bed, washed my face, tied my hair up, and made a to-do list. Not for anyone else. Just for me. And the first thing on that list, take back my confidence. I didn't want to change for Ryan. He'd already seen my worth and tossed it aside. This transformation wasn't about showing him what he lost. It was about reminding myself what I deserved. So I joined a local gym. Not one of those trendy influencer gyms where everyone's wearing matching sets and filming themselves. Just a quiet, no-frills space with rusted dumbbells and soft music. I walked in that first day nervous as hell. I hadn't worked out properly in months. But the trainer, a kind woman named Tia, saw something in me. Not a broken girl, but someone who was ready to rise again. She didn't throw me into intense workouts or shame me for anything. Instead, she asked me how I was feeling. Tired, numb, angry, lost. And she said, "Good, we'll use all of that." That gym became my therapy. Every drop of sweat felt like a layer of pain leaving my body. Every mile on the treadmill was a mile further from the version of me who begged for Ryan's attention. I started sleeping better, eating better, thinking clearer. And outside the gym, I made changes too. I unfollowed Ryan on everything, deleted our photos, blocked his number, not to be dramatic, but to protect my peace. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from while I was too busy babysitting a dying relationship. Friends who reminded me of who I was before Ryan ever showed up in my life. I started therapy too, real therapy. And let me tell you, that was a game changer. I thought I was just there to talk about a breakup, but it went deeper. Turns out Ryan wasn't the first person I let make me feel small. I'd been doing that to myself for years, shrinking to be liked, quieting my needs, constantly apologizing for just existing. Week by week, I peeled back those layers. And somewhere in the middle of that healing, I found her again. The girl who laughed without checking who was watching. The girl who wore crop tops even when her tummy wasn't flat. The girl who knew that her value wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion. I started dancing again, something I hadn't done in years. Not professionally, just in my room, in front of a mirror, blasting music, smiling for no reason. I started journaling, messy pages filled with rage, hope, gratitude, and dreams. I started dressing for myself. Bold colors, high ponytails, glossy lips, not to impress anyone, but because it made me feel alive. And slowly the reflection in the mirror started to change. Not because I lost weight, though I did drop some pounds, but because I looked stronger. I was stronger. And the girl staring back at me, she looked like she didn't take crap from anyone. And then my dad called. Around the 3-month mark of my healing journey, I was in the kitchen pouring a protein shake when my dad called me. He usually kept work and home life separate, so I was surprised when he asked, casually, if I'd like to come to a formal dinner next month. It was a corporate board event, mostly for investors, executives, and partners. But he said it was time I started showing up more. "You're the future of this company," he said. "People should start knowing that." And I just froze, because I knew exactly what company he was talking about. Ryan's company, yeah, the same Ryan who laughed at me in public. The same Ryan who called me natural like it was a compliment, then turned cold the moment I gained a little weight. He didn't know that I was the daughter of the CEO he'd never met in person. The same CEO he used to complain about constantly, saying things like they don't care about their employees or upper management is so disconnected. And now I had an invitation in hand. One he couldn't see coming. I had no intention of making a scene or causing drama. But something about walking into that room, looking like the woman he underestimated, that felt like a moment I deserved. Not for revenge, but for closure, real, satisfying closure. The kind that doesn't come with yelling or tears, just a smile and a reminder that I made it through. That night was still a few weeks away, but I was ready. And Ryan, he had no idea what was coming. The night of the company dinner came faster than I expected. And honestly, I was ready. Not nervous, not angry, just calm. It was a quiet kind of confidence, the kind you get when you've spent enough time picking up the pieces of yourself. When you've cried all the tears and stood back up without anyone's help. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out my dress. It was a deep black, sleek and elegant, hugging all the right places. I didn't wear it to prove anything to anyone. I wore it because I felt powerful in it. Strong, like I belonged in every room people once thought I wasn't good enough for. My dad smiled when he saw me. He didn't say much, he never does, but I could tell he was proud. And honestly, I was proud too, not just of how I looked, but of how far I'd come. We arrived at the venue, a huge glass ballroom filled with expensive chandeliers, the smell of perfume and polished wood, and the sound of soft jazz humming in the background. It was beautiful. People were already gathering, shaking hands, making small talk about numbers and projections and stocks and mergers. But me, I was looking for one person. And then I saw him. Ryan. He was standing near the corner, drink in hand, laughing at something one of his coworkers said. He hadn't noticed me yet. And why would he? He wasn't expecting me to show up here. Not at this event, this circle, this level. He still thought I was the same girl he mocked in front of his friends. But things were about to change. A few minutes later, the event officially began. My dad was called up to give his welcome speech, and as usual, he nailed it. He spoke about the company's growth, its future, and then almost casually introduced me. Tonight, I'd like you all to meet someone very special. She's the next face of this company, my daughter, Alina. And just like that, every head in the room turned toward me, including Ryan's. I could feel his eyes on me, that exact second, like the air shifted around us. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even blink. I just held my head high, nodded slightly, and turned back to the stage. He looked so confused. His brain was obviously working overtime trying to connect the dots. And the more he thought about it, the paler he looked. I stepped off to the side after the speech, greeting a few board members and partners. Everyone was kind and respectful. Most had never seen me before, but they knew of me. My dad had clearly kept me in his plans, just not in the public eye. A few minutes later, I heard someone calling my name softly behind me. I turned. It was Ryan. He looked nervous, not in a cute or sweet way, but like someone who just realized they majorly messed up. He opened his mouth to speak, but I beat him to it. "Didn't expect to see me here, did you?" He stammered something like, "I didn't know, you never said." Of course I didn't, because if he had known I was the CEO's daughter, he would have treated me differently. He would have been fake nice, pretended to care more, and smiled more often. But that was the whole point. I didn't want to be treated differently because of my name. I wanted to be loved for who I am. And clearly he failed that test. We talked for maybe 2 minutes. Mostly him trying to explain, to backpedal, to make excuses about the past. About how he didn't mean those things, how he was just joking, and how things got complicated. I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't give him any emotional reaction he could latch onto. I just looked at him and said, "Now you know." Then I turned around and walked away. It wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. He finally saw the version of me he never cared to discover. And I didn't even need to lift a finger to make it happen. The universe did the heavy lifting for me. And walking away from him, in that moment, felt better than anything he could have ever said. After that night at the company dinner, everything felt different. I didn't mean to embarrass Ryan. I didn't plan to humiliate him. Honestly, I didn't have to. The moment he realized who I really was, the daughter of the CEO he worked under, his entire world cracked right in front of him. And the best part? I didn't even lift a finger. I let the truth speak for itself, but the real satisfaction didn't come from watching him squirm. It came from watching myself stay calm, collected, and classy in the moment I could have easily broken down or lashed out. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to say, "I told you so." I just needed to walk away. And I did. But Ryan, he couldn't. It started slowly. A simple, "Hey." Then a, "Can we talk?" Followed by a long paragraph a few days later, talking about how sorry he was, how he didn't mean to hurt me, how he missed the old us, and how I looked amazing at the dinner. I read it all, every single word. And then I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from clarity. And I already had mine. I could have replied. I could have roasted him. I could have called him out on every cruel thing he ever said, every moment he made me feel worthless, every joke he cracked at my expense. But I didn't, because silence is louder than screaming when you know your worth. Now, I didn't want to ruin his career. That's not who I am. But I did want to make one thing clear. There are consequences for how you treat people, especially the ones you pretend to love. I had a private conversation with the HR director at my dad's company, not to get Ryan fired, but to request that he be transferred off his current project. The one he used to brag about, the one that gave him visibility and extra bonuses. Why? Because I didn't want someone who disrespected others, especially women, representing a brand I might one day inherit. He wasn't demoted. He wasn't publicly shamed. He was just quietly moved to a junior role reporting to someone he used to laugh at in meetings. That wasn't revenge. That was standards. And people like Ryan, they need to learn that titles don't protect you from your behavior catching up. While he was busy trying to win me back, I was busy falling back in love with myself. I danced more, traveled a little, started shadowing at my dad's office, not just as a daughter, but as a future leader. And everywhere I went, people respected me, not for how I looked or for who I dated, but for my ideas, my strength, my drive. It felt good. Like I had finally taken off the invisible weight I'd been carrying for years, the need to be liked, to be approved, to be good enough. I stopped looking in mirrors with hate. I stopped checking my phone every 5 seconds, hoping for his name to top up. I stopped needing anyone to tell me I was beautiful or worthy. Because I knew, and that kind of knowing, it can't be taken away. One day, I was grabbing coffee after work, and guess who walked in? Ryan. Of course. He saw me, smiled nervously, and walked over like we were old friends. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Maybe he hadn't? He asked how I'd been, said I looked really good, and that he had been thinking about me. I just smiled politely, said I was doing great, and that's all. I didn't ask how he was doing. I didn't open the door to reconnect. I didn't give him anything, because the version of me he wanted now, she didn't exist anymore. She had grown, she had healed, and she had leveled up. He stood there awkwardly, waiting for me to say more. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my coffee and said, "I have to go, meeting's in 10, even though I had no meeting. I walked out, and I didn't look back. They only value you when you no longer need them. They treat you like you're disposable until they realize you're irreplaceable. But by then, it's too late. I could see it in his eyes that day. The regret, the sadness, the weight of every word he'd ever said crashing down on him. And the truth is, I didn't need to make him feel that way. He did it to himself. And that was the best revenge of all. It had been almost 2 months since I last saw Ryan at that coffee shop. By then, I honestly thought he got the message. That I had moved on. That we were done. That there was no opening left for him to crawl back into my life. But I was wrong. One evening, as I was getting ready to leave work, I saw a familiar name pop up on my phone. It was him. Again. But this time, it wasn't a text. It was a voicemail. And curiosity got the best of me. So I listened. He said he'd been thinking about everything, the way he treated me, the way things ended, and how badly he wanted a second chance. He admitted that he let his ego and immaturity ruin something beautiful, that he was in a dark place now and couldn't stop remembering the way I looked at him the last time we spoke. Then he said something that hit me harder than I expected. He said, "You're the only person who ever loved me for who I was, and I destroyed that." For a second, just a split second, my chest ached, because part of me had loved him so deeply, so purely, so stupidly. I remembered all those late-night talks, the laughs, the way I used to hold his hand like it was the safest place in the world. But then I remembered something more important. I remembered how he made me feel. Unseen, unwanted, embarrassed, ashamed. I remembered standing alone outside that rooftop lounge, humiliated in front of strangers, wondering how someone who claimed to love me could hurt me that badly. And just like that, the ache disappeared. A few days later, it happened. He showed up at my apartment. I was coming home from a long day, heels in hand, hair messy from the wind, just looking forward to a cup of tea and some bad reality TV, and there he was, standing at the bottom of the stairs, holding a small bouquet of flowers. He looked nervous, not the confident guy I once knew. Just lost. He said he'd been waiting for me, that he had to talk, that he couldn't let things end the way they did. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to scream. But instead, I nodded and let him talk, because I wasn't scared of his words anymore. We sat on the steps. He handed me the flowers, and I set them gently beside me. I didn't want to be rude, but I also wasn't going to pretend this was romantic. He talked. He apologized. And for the first time ever, he actually meant it. There was no blaming, no deflecting, no twisting things around. He said he was wrong, that he let superficial things blind him, that he used to think a relationship was about status or looks, but now realized how shallow that mindset was. He admitted he was jealous of my success too, that he had always wondered why I was so composed, so focused, so together, and when he found out I was the CEO's daughter, he finally understood. And then came the big question. He asked if there was any chance, any small part of me that could forgive him, not just for the things he said, but for not loving me the way I deserved. And I looked at him, really looked, and I felt, not love, just peace, because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I had outgrown him. I thanked him for apologizing. I told him I appreciated the honesty, but I also told him the truth, that I was no longer the girl who waited for his replies, that I was no longer the girl who stared at the mirror, wondering if my weight made me less lovable, that I was no longer the girl who would shrink herself just to make him feel bigger. I told him I had found happiness, not in someone else, but in myself. And going back, that would be like returning to a house that had already burned down, knowing full well it couldn't shelter me anymore. He sat there, silent, like he knew this was it. And then I stood up, picked up the flowers, and gently handed them back to him. I said, "Take these for someone who still needs to learn what I already have." Then I turned and walked away, not with drama, not with tears, but with grace, because real closure doesn't come from slamming doors. It comes from knowing you'll never open them again. He hasn't reached out since. Maybe he finally accepted it. Or maybe he's still trying to understand how he lost someone who gave him so many chances. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore, because my story isn't about him now. It's about me. The girl who got laughed at for gaining weight. The girl who was insulted in front of strangers. The girl who turned her pain into power, her silence into strength, and her sadness into self-worth. And trust me, that kind of glow, it doesn't come from makeup or filters or gym selfies. It comes from healing, and from never, ever lowering your standards again. It's funny how things come full circle. There was a time I thought I needed Ryan to be happy. A time when my worth was tied to how he looked at me, how often he texted me, how tightly he held my hand in public. But now, I don't even think about him. Not because I'm pretending, but because he's no longer a part of the life I've built. A life that's fuller, brighter, and entirely mine. I started living for me. After everything settled down, after the texts stopped, after the awkward run-ins became less and less, I finally had space. Space to breathe. space to grow, space to live without carrying the weight of someone else's opinions. And I filled that space with everything I once put on hold. I started painting again. Not for Instagram likes, not for anyone's approval, just for me. I traveled solo to a beach town I'd always wanted to visit. I ate gelato at midnight and danced barefoot in the sand. I made new friends. The kind who hype you up in the changing room and text you just to say, "I'm proud of you." I said yes to opportunities I used to think I wasn't ready for. Leadership workshops, public speaking events, even representing my dad's company in meetings. And you know what? I wasn't just ready. I was thriving. Not because I became someone else, but because I finally returned to who I was before. I tried to mold myself into someone he would accept. My body changed, but so did my mind. Yes, I lost some weight, but more importantly, I lost the need to earn love through my appearance. I started seeing food as fuel, not punishment. I stopped stepping on scales and started checking in with how I felt, not how I looked. I stopped looking at other girls and comparing myself. I started complimenting them, celebrating them, because I realized someone else's beauty is not a threat to mine. And that kind of mental shift? That was the real transformation. And then, something unexpected happened. One morning, I got an email from the HR director of my dad's company. They were looking to launch a new social impact campaign, one focused on body positivity, mental health, and workplace confidence. And they wanted me to lead it. Not because I was the CEO's daughter, but because they'd seen my personal growth, heard how I carried myself, watched me rise through hard times without bitterness. So I said yes. And just like that, the girl who once hid behind insecurity was now standing in front of boardrooms, leading conversations about confidence and kindness. And guess what? People listened because it was real, because I had lived it. Ryan, he's just a chapter now. I heard through someone that he eventually left the company, said he wanted a fresh start somewhere else, and that's okay. I don't hate him. I don't wish bad things on him. I hope he grows. I hope he learns how to love someone better the next time around. I hope he finds peace with the version of himself he used to be. But as for me, I've already made peace with the past, with the pain, with myself. I know who I am now. I'm Alina. I'm 22. I've been broken, belittled, embarrassed, and underestimated. But I've also risen, healed, transformed, and owned every step of the journey. I no longer shrink myself for anyone. I no longer ask for the bare minimum and call it love. I no longer let anyone's opinion shake my foundation. Because I know what I bring to the table, and I'm not afraid to eat alone if I have to. So to the girl watching this right now, if you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough, if someone ever laughed at your body, your dreams, your heart, if you're stuck in a relationship where you feel more pain than peace, let me be the one to say this. You deserve more. You deserve a love that doesn't require you to earn it. You deserve kindness without conditions. And most of all, you deserve to choose yourself. Because once you do, everything else starts falling into place. If this story moved you, please don't forget to give it a like. And if you love emotional, powerful stories like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the channel.